All right, this is as simple as it gets. You got a user going to use a browser. They're going to access the AWS gateway. It's going to proxy down into the AWS Lambda function. All right, so let's go ahead and let's just build it and see what we can come up with. All right, the first thing you're going to want to do is get an AWS account. Amazon gives you 1 year free. If you're a developer or sysadmin or whatever, and you're trying to learn AWS, working on your certification, you just set up an account and you can start playing around with some of their functionality. Be aware of what you're messing around with. They've got their little billing dashboard. You can check out how much you've spent. They have free tiers for most of their services. If you go over, you will get billed, but it isn't very much. All right, so what you can do if you're looking for Lambdas is you can open up services and you can see kind of this overwhelming list of functionality. Here you've got the compute section. Here, typically you're working with the EC2 instances, but here you've got Lambda functions. This is kind of like their serverless compute functionality. Here they say run code without thinking about servers. Of course, they really are using servers, but they're managed by Amazon. So go ahead and click on that and we'll just power through. Go ahead and click, you can look at the menu. We want to create a function. I'm going to go ahead and create a function. You can use a blueprint. They have like a whole library of functions out of the box stuff that the community has built or that Amazon has provided. We're going to go ahead and create something from scratch. So I'll go ahead and call this add one. You can call it whatever you want. It's pretty cool. You can use many languages that you might be familiar with. I kind of prefer to use .NET or C#, but unfortunately, when you use C#, you can't edit the code in line. So they're going to have you upload like a zip file. I'm going to be lazy today and go ahead and just use JavaScript. I kind of remember my JavaScript and I think I can kind of plow through with that. Their default permission is to upload logs to Amazon CloudWatch. That's they give it for free, but it's really for their benefit because they're the ones doing the scaling of your services. So now they take you right into their default setup. They've got a hello world here for you. And we're going to go ahead and kind of do something a little more elaborate than a hello world. All right. Now I can go ahead and add a trigger or add a destination. If you add a trigger, you can go ahead and choose the different ways in which you can access the Lambda expression. I'm going to do that later. So we can go ahead and hit cancel. If I wanted to have the Lambda function, I said Lambda expression. If I wanted the Lambda function to interact with some more backend APIs or even an S3 repository, I can click on add destination and I can choose what I wanted to do. Like maybe the Lambda function executes something and somebody is subscribing to that event. So you can create a notification service, or maybe you want to create a queue. Or you can call another Lambda so you can chain your Lambdas together. We'll go ahead and go right here into the code source. Being JavaScript, they have a little editor for JavaScript. All right, this is some horrible code. Just basically something a little better than a hello world. Here, the event is going to expect a child object called query string parameters, and it's going to have a property called number value. Now you can override this because it would kind of stink if the Lambda function was tightly coupled to the get verb of your request. Maybe we want to actually use post and get, but we're going to be a little lazy here and just use the default object name query string parameter. Number value could be whatever you want it to be, and it's just going to be of 1. So first thing you got to do is deploy the code, and here it's actually deployed. It's in Amazon now. That's how easy it was. We want to test it, but before you test it, you got to actually create the test. So we'll call it add one test. All right, we'll go ahead and create this. And the idea is you can create any number of tests. So now that we've created it, we can actually execute it and we'll see if it works. Well, I'd passed in my test the number 3. So let's take a peek at that again. Here you can see the response, status code 200, body is 4. So in other words, we want to execute this code and have just 4 sent back to the browser. It's very primitive. All right, so our tests have passed. Let's go ahead and get out of here now that our Lambda has been saved. And let's take a peek at the AWS API gateway. So here under networking and content delivery, you can see, and we just want to create a REST API. We don't want it to be private. We're going to go ahead and expose this to the internet. We'll build one of these up. So we want this just to be REST, and it could be WebSocket if you want to maintain a connection with your API. You maybe have streaming data. We just want to pass in a get query string and get a value back. We don't want to use their prefabbed hello world, so we're going to create a new API, and we're going to give it a name. And we don't want it to be private or edge optimized, so we're just going to use the default here. The thing about proof of concepts is, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I haven't really used this a lot. I think I learned it like 2 minutes before I made this video. So that's the whole point of proof of concepts, is we want to get dangerous with it. We want to just go out there and make mistakes and see what we can learn. Don't be afraid to try and fail and try again. All right, so here we want to go ahead and create an action, or actually we'll create a resource first. That's pretty much your endpoint. And the resource might be called add one. I think it's clever enough that if you use a human-friendly word, yeah, human-friendly word, they make a nice resource path out of that. We're not going to use cores right now. This is just really basic. It's not crossing from one application to another. So we'll just create the resource. So this is kind of like your URL segment. Now we want to add a method to this. The method is the verb, right? In this case, we're going to do a get. And that's kind of it. We're going to use a Lambda function. Here we want to use an existing Lambda function. Want to use Lambda proxy integration. Now what this does is, this is the thing that kind of defaults that use of that query string parameters value. We could override this if we want and simplify the object hierarchy, but for the sake of this demonstration, we'll just do what's easiest. The Lambda function, it's kind of like if you just type it in, it'll automatically know which Lambda function you have. And we'll use the default timeout. We'll hit save. Now this is important. We're saying we're about to give the API gateway that we just created permission to invoke your Lambda function. And this is the Amazon resource name of that Lambda function, kind of a unique identifier. And of course, that's what we want to do. Now I should note what I'm doing here is not secure, right? I didn't add, I've made this thing public. Anybody can access this endpoint right now. You usually don't want to do that. You want to implement some sort of authentication, make sure the user has permission. Otherwise, you know, you get billed by Amazon for the number of milliseconds that your function executes. Now that's kind of cool because you're not renting a server and having it stood up and renting for the time. Maybe you normally set up a web server and you have it running for a year. Maybe you have to pay for that server and pay for the networking. That's the really cool thing about AWS Lambda, is you only pay for when it's being used. Now, the inverse could be a problem, right? If it's a publicly available function and it gets popular, people could try to do a denial of service on it or just hammer it and you end up racking up the fees. So here we'll go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and button mash this and see if I can figure out how to test this. Oh, I remember what I forgot to do. I need to actually deploy the API. So now here you might have different stages of deployment. Maybe you have a staging environment or a development environment. Here I'm just going to call it testing, and that would just manifest in the URL. I'll call this test. All right, so we're ready to test our API. You can see that it's got an URL that's going to take you to the root of our test environment. If I click on add one or get, you can see that it adds the URL segment for add one. That's the endpoint that we want to test. And hit F11. And the reason this doesn't work is we didn't pass in a parameter. So we're going to go ahead and add a number value. So 14. There you go. So 14 plus 1 equals 15. And that's kind of it. You'll notice this was a very sloppy presentation, but the point is I'm trying to illustrate just how easy it is to get messy with this AWS stuff. So now that I've proven that this can work for me, I can start to think about more elaborate implementations of AWS Lambda. Maybe I want to use the Lambda for processing streams of data. Maybe I'm building an importer and I want to execute some validation, or maybe I want to do some transformation on the data, and then maybe I want to hand it off to another Lambda function that can then do an export to an S3 bucket. And I can do all of this without setting up any EC2 instances. And I get the benefits of AWS managing all of this for me. So this is kind of getting into that territory of the platform as a service and the software as a service. So sure, I can inject a little bit of code, but the infrastructure and the platform is set up and managed for me by Amazon. All right, hope that was enjoyable, or at least you enjoyed watching the hot mess that was. So cool, thanks so much.